Hello and welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. So Dave's gone and found another article on tests that we're going to talk about today. So we've done a couple of these in the past. Some interesting sort of articles and blogs pop up, and they often spark some thoughts in Dave and I. I'm like, oh yeah, that's something to share with the community. So I'm going to hand over to Dave shortly, but this one's by a chap called Jamie. How do I pronounce that? Is that Tom? I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the surname, actually. I apologise, Jamie. 3 teacher phrases I must stop using. I love these ones. I've not seen any of these, so this is going to be quite good. But yeah, so tell us tell us a bit about this then, Dave. Also, you came across this. I'll pop the URL there for people who want to see the article.
Yeah, well, I'm quite an avid reader of the TES magazine, so quick shout out to them. We're not affiliated with them in any sense, by the way, and we don't get any remuneration from them. This video is not sponsored by them in any sense, but I do quite like to read the articles and keep up to date with various sort of teaching pedagogies and thoughts and politics, and just reflect on them with my own teaching, really. And so this is something that I'd like to do moving forward more and more, actually, with Unscripted, is just finding various articles in the education space, and then for us to reflect on our own classroom practice and whether we agree or disagree with the author and what we do. So yeah, a few things in here to talk about today. So
Right, so 3 teacher phrases I must stop using. Now, obviously, I've just glanced my eye over the banners and I've seen them now for the first time. Here we go. Number 1, shh.
Yeah, that's right. So it's this kind of, keeping a class quiet, and the number of teachers that I see going shush, 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 and actually, when you're observing a lesson, sometimes it actually becomes quite off-putting. A teacher will be in the middle of a sentence, and they just keep, from time to time, the class noise is building as they're talking, and they just can't. They do that permanently. And that really isn't great practice. No. So we're going to think about, what do we do, and reflect a little bit on what Jamie is saying about what he does and why he wants to stop this practice. But I'm going to start with something and we like to have a little bit of controversy.
Yes,
so I want to just start with something here and get your immediate thoughts, Craig, because as you say, you've just seen the banners, but you haven't had time to think about them and reflect on them, which is all part of this Unscripted series, really. Whereas I've had much more time to think about my answers. So here's the first bit of controversy. There are some schools out there. I'm not going to mention any names. Some of them are actually quite famous schools in the country, who have a 0 talking policy. So the idea being that students, when they're in a classroom, do not talk unless they are spoken to, unless they're invited to answer a question. But whilst they're doing their work, there is an expectation of absolute silence at all times. And some schools have even taken that a little bit further to say they expect silence in the corridors as well. So in that lesson transition between one lesson and another, as students travel from one classroom to the other, they've gone for 0 talking in the corridors as well. And I mean, let's not talk about corridors, but let's talk about classrooms and teaching. What's your view, Craig, on silence in the classroom?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think I know some of the schools you're talking about. One in particular, I think, became famous to the point where it actually made the sort of national news a couple of years ago, to the point where I think all the kids in the classroom also have to sit there with their hands folded on their lap, and they have to track the teacher as they move around the classroom, don't they? I think that's what you talk about, right? Well, I've never implemented a complete and utter silence in a classroom unless the students have completely annoyed me, and I've imposed it for a set minutes, a set period of time. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think allowing students to communicate and have that conversation, and not necessarily constantly all the time about the work that they're doing, is okay as long as the work is getting done. So that was always that's kind of the bench I would set in my classes. I definitely do the don't smile before Christmas routine. For those that don't know, go in, you know, go in hard. What is true? You go in tough, set your expectations, let them be really clear, concise, consistent, you know, be absolute with everything you demand of your students. But then as that relationship builds, it's much easier to bring those down a bit than it is to try and start off all jolly and friendly and then sort of impose yourself and your sanctions later on. I find it doesn't work that way around. So I would always be very formal very early on with all new classes. My expectations were clear. But I've always been one that doesn't mind. In fact, I find it a bit odd working in a classroom that's in complete silence. Right, off you go. We've got 15 minutes to do this task. Off you go. Complete silence. What I find is I'll end up starting random conversations with the students because the silence is weird. So I don't mind a little bit of chatter. And I don't even insist, and this might be controversial, I don't even insist that the chatter all the time has to be about the work as long as they are working. That's the phrase I use in class. So, you know, if you're getting on with it and you're working, I don't mind you having a conversation as long as the work is getting done. Now, obviously, you know, you've got to keep on top of that. And I don't start off saying, yeah, spend today catching up about what you did at the weekend, because they won't get any work done. But that's always been a general sort of philosophy of mine. Once they get under work, they're doing individual group paired work. I don't mind sort of low level chatting with the partners, people that are next to you. And I'm not going to reprimand a student if I catch them talking about something that's not the work, as long as the work is getting done. So that's why I've been. Has it always worked for me? Nope. Let's be honest. Sometimes you're like, what was the last thing you did? And sometimes I had to go, right, enough's enough. We're having 10 minutes. You're working in absolute silence. And if I hear anyone talking, I'll restart the timer. And that's my own fault, isn't it? I let things slip, and that's natural. So I guess that's where I am. Go on. I'm curious to hear you and what Jamie has to say.
Yeah. So what I've got to say first. So there's quite a lot to unpack here. You mentioned an awful lot of different things there. I think this idea, firstly, of don't smile till Christmas. I'm not going to just let you get away with that. So I think the point here, I think there are 2 points. I think the first is you're not their friends, but it doesn't mean you can't be friendly. That's the point one. And point two is that, as you said, it's hard to establish your expectations if you're trying to ramp them up all the time. It's much easier to set a high expectation and then lower it down depending on, you know, the situation and what you're doing. So when the teacher says, sort of, you know, don't smile till Christmas, they don't really mean don't smile till Christmas. What they mean is set expectations really high so that your class know absolutely where they stand and they are going to meet your expectations, because teenagers like to know where they stand. It's a bit of a misconception that you know, teenagers like you to be their friend. That's not what they're after from you as a teacher. They've already got friends, and you don't fit into their peer group. Okay. Even if you are the young teacher that's still sort of 23, 24 years old, you are still old in their eyes. You are not in their age bracket. Okay?
You're absolutely right.
You don't think like them. You don't act like them. And so you are not their friend. It doesn't mean you can't be friendly. Looks like you wanted to jump back in.
Yeah, I did. Sorry, so many things firing. You're right, because I taught trainee teachers in my school, in my department, and this is one thing I would tell them as well. Students might think, oh, I love that teacher who's all kind of easy, friendly with us. He has a bit of a laugh and a banter, and you think that's the way to go. And it's like, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And that phrase, I've used that phrase many times as well, and to jump in, it's okay to be friendly with the students, but not to become their friends. It is two different things. You're absolutely right. Oh, I had a right little gem in there. I was, and I've gone and sidetracked myself.
I'll see if you can think about it in a minute. But Yeah, so that's what we mean. It's about having those high expectations. So coming back to the sort of, shush bit for a minute before we get too sidetracked. So I agree with you. I don't really like silence in my classroom unless I am trying to re-ascertain my authority. So, what happens if you get too friendly? And you can start with really high expectations and then bring them down a little bit as the class get to know you and they understand where your lines are and your boundaries and the kind of personality you are. Then you can kind of loosen up a little bit. But when you do, you have to appreciate that the lines start to get blurred again over time, and they will gradually reduce and reduce to a point where you suddenly realize, actually, this has gone a little bit too far. This isn't what I want and what I expect. And you have to sort of reset yourself and your class at that point. And so if I'm trying to, remind them who's in charge, then I might do what you do and say, right, let's just stop here. This is going a bit too far. I'm now going to expect you to just work in silence for a little bit, just so that we can, get this done. And I never do it in a threatening way. I do it in a way that lets them know why the silence is important. It's important because we've got an endpoint to reach. We're not going to reach it. And I want you to concentrate. And you would be better off learning this and reflecting on this when it's very quiet rather than with one of your peers. But it doesn't mean that I don't always want you to not be talking to your peers, because I actually think conversation in the classroom, whether it's about the work and sometimes even when it's not about the work, is valuable. As human beings, we always communicate with each other, whether that's with our body language or with our spoken word. And I just think that's just part of being a human being. And I think to subdue that when it's not necessary, I think you lose something actually in the learning process by doing that. And you lose something in the rapport with students, which is very important as part of the learning process when you do that. And my personal view is, and I know it's slightly controversial, but my view is, if you're a teacher that's insisting on silence all the time, and you're a school that's insisting on silence all the time, I think you've got a bit of a problem there with your own authority. For some reason, you don't feel empowered enough or powerful enough in that classroom to be able to get the best out of those students without asserting something that's unnecessary on them. And I think it comes down more to you as a teacher and your lack of confidence, actually, than the educational benefit of silence. And I know that's not a view that every teacher out there will hold. I get that. So did you have something else you wanted to put in? Because I wanted to talk about the strategies for silence and getting the students to be a bit quieter.
Yeah, I did remember my thing from earlier, so I'll interject that now. I was saying, if you go back a generation or two, maybe 50 years, there were certain job professions where they innately held respect due to their position in society. A police person, a teacher. Teachers had respect because they were teachers. Now, rightly or wrongly, you cannot go, and a lot of new teachers think they will get respect because they're a teacher. You don't gain respect because you're a teacher. I'm afraid that's not a thing which happens anymore. You gain respect through being consistent, by having clear expectations, by and that's what I mean by starting, don't smile before Christmas. And that thing about not wanting students to become your friends, although you might think that's a better atmosphere, actually you're right. Students will gain and you will earn students' respect actually by being firm, fair, and consistent. They will know what to expect. They will know when to expect it. You are sanctioning everyone equally, whether that's the polite kid who's misbehaved or the naughty kid that's misbehaved. You're not having favorites. And actually, you will find that gains respect to the students, and then those friendships will begin. You will then be able to become friendly with your students. And obviously, a lot of these classes you will teach in lower school and maybe GCSE and take to A level. And I've had this before in my other schools. Sometimes you get your A level students and maybe you've taught them for 5 years. And now they're A-level students. They're young adults. Suddenly they're not coming to school in their uniform. Some schools even allow them to call teachers by their first name. I know that's dependent on the school, but the relationship changes and the students sort of start to veer into, and you do maybe form a different relationship. You start to have a bit of banter with the students that you wouldn't have with a year 7 class. But whenever in a sixth form class, I felt that line started to drift. It's funny. I've been able to put my stern face on, look at the sixth former, and they will remember that teacher they've respected for 5 years instantly. And they'll go, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I went a bit too far there, didn't I? I went, yes, you just need to remember where that line is. And it's not a problem. It's not an argument. It's not an issue, because they remember that they respect you and you've always been that consistent, fair teacher. So yeah, that's a bit sidetracked, but yes, I remember that. Build that early, get those expectations. That allows you to become friendly. And that's and student-teacher relationships. It's not a surprise. It's one of the highest factors that affect students' achievement. The research shows that. But that comes out of clear expectations and firmness, not out of trying to become their friends. And that's really important to learn, I think, for new teachers. Sorry, I had a bit of a sidetrack there.
So let's have a look at what Jamie was just saying in the article there. He said, my noble intention this year is to mark out before a task exactly what level of noise I want. Silent work, quiet conversations, or students talking to each other. And I think, yeah, that's perfectly valid and I've seen some teachers have like a dial in their classroom on their classroom wall. And the sort of dial is pointed to sort of like silent, or to, conversations, or, whatever. And it's those visual indications to a student about what the current expectations are. And they can work really well. I don't feel I need that, but it can be helpful for some teachers. He's written, I'll have a very clear conversation with my classes about what that should look like, making the volume levels explicit rather than implicit. It's about students knowing where they stand again. If the students don't achieve that, I'll stop the whole class and remind them, rather than being ignored and undermining me, with shh, shh, shh all the time. So there's a couple of things there that are really important, especially for new teachers. When things are starting to get out of hand, or they're going beyond your expectation, what's important is that you don't lower your expectation. Students need to know where they stand. And if you keep moving the line all the time, they become confused. And what a student will try and do, what teenagers will do, is they'll try and find where the line is. Okay, that's kind of built into their DNA as a teenager, that they want to test you. Now, they're not doing that because they don't like you. They're doing it because they want to know what your expectation is. And if you're not clear about that, that's when they start going a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower. And eventually it just gets completely out of hand and they're not respecting you at all. So there's a couple of things in here. So stopping the whole class, that's really important. As soon as your expectations are not being met, you should stop the class. Now, we could do a whole episode on how you stop a class effectively, so perhaps we won't go down that road too deeply today. But the idea of stopping the class to reset those expectations is very, very important. Now, something to bear in mind, if you've got a tactic that you use to stop the class and they stop, and you reset the expectation and then you get them going again, if they immediately return to that same level of noise and that same level of conversation, you have not effectively stopped them. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You have to effectively stop them in order to be able to effectively reset them. Okay, so you need strategies that are going to enable you to stop the class and refocus them. And maybe we will talk about a couple of those in a minute. But the other thing I would say, let's go to the very other end of the spectrum here. When things really get out of hand, they're not respecting you, and you just feel that it's completely out of control. What can you do? Well, I think there are a couple of things that you can do here. I think you can, and this is where I'm saying, stopping the class isn't being very effective. What can you do? I think it depends how long you've got to the end of the lesson. That's the first thing. If you haven't got very long to the end of the lesson, it's probably a Give up, give it up. You're probably not going, it's not going to be worth it by the time you've put the energy into getting it right. The bell's going to go at the end of the lesson. It's probably not worth it. So in that situation, if you don't think it's worth it, you can let it go, because you're going to pick it up at the beginning of the next lesson. And I'll talk more about that in a second. If there's plenty of time to go and they can still meet some learning objectives, but they just need to get back on track in the right way, but it's got completely out of hand where you're not able to sufficiently sort of stop and restart them effectively, you need to get them out of the room. Get them out of the room and get them lined up again. Really reset that lesson, get them outside of the room, lined up in silence. Okay. And that's where I'm going to pick up the previous point, which is if you've decided to let it go and you're going to pick it up the next lesson, line them up outside the classroom, even if the school policy is actually they just come on in, let's get started. Because you need to temporarily break that in order to set the right tone. Okay, so you're going to stand at the door so they physically can't go in past you through the room, and then you're going to let them go in like 2s and 3s, and you're going to monitor what's happening as they go into the room. Okay, so you let 3 in and then just put your arm across the open door so they can't push past you, and watch. And if those 3 start talking, you can say, excuse me, we're entering in silence today, and don't let the next 3 in until those 3 are doing what you expect. Okay. Now you might also have rearranged the seating plan. You don't necessarily have to do that, by the way. That might be another thing that you could do as a further step in a subsequent lesson, because you want to have more ammunition. You don't want to run out of ammunition. You don't want to run out of ideas here. Okay. So you don't want to implement everything all in one go. You want to try a strategy, then try another strategy, rather than trying all the strategies at once, would be my advice. Okay, so you let the 3 in, they're quiet. You let the next 3 in, they're quiet, and you get them all into the classroom. They're all quiet at that point, because at the moment any noise starts, you're going to stop letting students in, and you're going to insist that it's quiet before you let anybody else in. Now, it could take you 15 minutes to do that, and that's fine, because a student can't learn if they're not listening. Okay, so don't worry about the time it takes you to do this. Get them in. Once they're all in and they're absolutely quiet, then you can say, I'm really sorry I had to do that today, but it was necessary because the last lesson or the current lesson up to this point is not acceptable because you're not learning. And my job is to ensure that you have the best opportunity to learn. And that's why we're doing this. Anyway, so there's a couple of really sort of hard-hitting strategies, Craig, to get silence in your classroom when it's kind of got out of control. But some of the other quick things, I'm interested in your view. So some teachers have a signal, and they train their class right from the very first lesson. That is, if I put both hands up, it means I need you to be silent. And it's a very obvious visual cue as soon as they say, and then the teacher doesn't say anything because they've trained the class to watch for the signal. That can be really effective. And the other thing is that if you have got this little routine that you've got, whether it's hands up or you've got a way of getting them, to look at you and to be quiet again without going to those extreme measures I've just discussed, then as you're talking, don't feel tethered to the front of the class. Go and move your body into the area of the classroom where it's likely to start having a little bit of chatter. Okay, because students are unnerved by your body presence. They don't like it. Okay, they don't like you being in their physical space. So if you move your body and you address the whole class from different positions in the classroom, it maintains that authority. And the way I always used to describe that to trainee teachers is, you're a lion and you are going to make sure that every part of your territory is not being encroached by another lion. That's what you're going to do. Okay. And there you go. And sometimes, the little look, train your students into your body language so that when you give a look, they know it's, oh, I'm not meeting expectations. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. Anyway, Craig, what do you do when the students are talking, then it's not going particularly well, you need to stop them? What do you do?
Nothing beyond everything you've just said. You've spoken for 10 minutes non-stop. So you're all those things. I was laughing, and my facial expressions, because I was like, I do that, I do that, I do that. It is all of those things. I've done the lining up and the resetting, and double down on what you said. If that takes 10-15 minutes, it's not a waste of time, because the learning time you regenerate by recreating the correct working atmosphere far outweighs the time you spent doing that hard reset. So that's important. You mentioned seating plans as another tactic. I've done that before. A lot of schools impose them and they're fixed. A lot of schools don't mind, and it's up to you. If it's up to you, then I will certainly use a new seating plan. They will moan, they will whinge. It doesn't matter. You say to them, if it's a school that doesn't have a seating plan policy, you can say the right to sit where you like is a privilege. It's not a right. And because the atmosphere is not conducive to learning, you have this seating plan. Don't ask me every lesson if we can sit where we like. If I get a consistent, decent working atmosphere for a while, I will choose to reward you by saying you can sit where you like. The moment that's not conducive to learning, I'll put you back in a seating plan. So that's that's something you can always do. Maybe a little bit more draconian, but it's quite common, and I've used this before. If your lesson precedes break or lunch, there's always obviously the little threat, but don't just make it a threat, do it as well. It's like, well, you've wasted 3 minutes of my time, so we're going to have 3 minutes of your time into break. Just if you say you're going to do that, please then use that. Don't think, oh, well, I need to get to the staff room for 20 minutes. I need my coffee, because all of a sudden they realize your threats, not really threats, but they don't mean anything. So be consistent. You can always do that. But all the things you said, I would definitely walk around the classroom when talking. There's a group over there, I'd new chore, and you're right. You go towards them, and it's that unnervousness of you being there. All those tactics. The only other one I do when I'm speaking is I ask all students to make sure they are looking at me. It's an extra distraction, as computer science teachers will know, in that they have a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor in front of them, which is awfully distracting. And so I won't talk to students while they're looking at their monitor or just clicking and doing this and moving out. I'll say, hands off your keyboards and mice, and I want everyone looking at me. If that doesn't work, I'll insist on monitors off. Which I used to do sometimes. Don't have to do it with all classes, but if they won't do, I'm like, right, monitors off. I can see around the room. I'm not starting until every monitor's off. Just little ways. But as you say, as long as you're consistent and they know what your expectations are, you'll find that you can pick up those things as soon as they start to slide a little bit, so they never slide too far. It's just being able to catch it early, be consistent. If you do that, you only have to do mini resets, and they can take, those mini resets can take effect in seconds with a look. It's only when you let it slide that you have to use some of the more draconian tactics back outside the classroom. But it happens to all of us. It's happened to me multiple times. Important thing, I think, is not to beat yourself up over it, really. Right. 28 minutes. Should we move on to another one? There's so much you can talk about with these, isn't there? So second phrase, I must stop using. Well, what does Jamie say? Right. Yes, and variations of a theme. Do you all understand? Are we all clear? Now, having not read the article, I'm assuming this is about his use of just the category of all. Has everyone got it? Has everyone got it? It's those sort of catch-all phrases he's talking about here, isn't it? Yeah, I can't stand those either. Have I ever said them? Of course I have. I'd be lying if I said no. Should you say them? No. Here's my first thoughts, and I'll hand over to you. The reason you don't say them, are we all clear? So what are you expecting from that response? Are you expecting the 5 students who are nervous and haven't got it and feel maybe they're always slightly underachieving to put their hand up and go, yes, I haven't got it? Because of course they don't. They wither into the background and they sit there and they nod politely if you look at them, or worse than that, they say nothing. You get no response back, therefore you think everyone's understood and you move on. Awful. That's my initial takeaway from that. But what's he put them?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what Jamie's written. So he said, this year I'll be spinning this gloriously on his head, talking about a previous paragraph. I will ask a range of young people in the room, what do you understand? Yeah. I'll ask a terrified child whose neck muscles are pronounced because of all their nodding, can you clear this up for us? Absolutely. It is about taking that question that has no answer, and you're not asking anyone particularly, and turning it into a question that is asked to a particular person and does have an answer. Okay. So absolutely, it's Jamie, what do you understand you have to do? And you're getting them just to repeat back to you what it is that they've just been asked to do. Jamie, what is it? What do you understand by the term, whatever it is? So being very specific. And again, we could do a whole video just on questioning techniques, and we won't go down that road either today, because it just take too long. But it's this idea of making sure that you're confident as a teacher that they are ready to get going with whatever it is that they're doing. And you're not going to achieve that by saying, are we all clear? Because as Craig's already said, the ones that aren't clear aren't going to tell you. And you probably won't get any response from the class when you ask a question like that, because nobody knows it's for them to answer. And so they just assume other people might answer, and therefore nobody answers. And you might get a few nods, you might get a few, but you're not going to get anything that's useful to you as a teacher. Now, if you do put a child on the spot, and I always say you should ask particular questions to particular students for a reason. Okay, so if I say, Jamie, what is it that I'm asking you to do? I'm picking Jamie because I think he either absolutely knows and he can just re-articulate it back to the class in a way that they're more sort of in resonance with, or I'm asking him because I think he might be a little bit unclear, and maybe I wasn't clear in my explanation, and I just want it kind of reflected back to me what it is I actually told the class to do. Or I'm asking the student that clearly hasn't been listening, and I'm asking them because I want to prove to them and others that aren't listening that they weren't listening. And that's a reason for asking the particular question. But what's also important is, if you do decide that you're going to pick on the student that you don't think can answer your question, that you don't then let them off the hook, because you already know they can't answer the question before you asked it. Okay, Jamie, what is it I'm asking you to do? I don't know, sir. And then the risk is that you then go and tell them again. Okay, I suggest you don't do that. I suggest what you do is now pick somebody else, okay, and say, well, okay, hang on then, Jamie, let's see if Sophie can help you. Sophie, what is it that I'm expecting you to do? And again, you've asked Sophie for a particular reason, right? Whatever one of those three reasons was. And then having asked Sophie, and Sophie then sort of articulates what's got to be done, you're either going to clear up a misconception or you're going to agree with her. Then you can say, Jamie, what is it that what did Sophie say? What is it that we're asking you to do? Don't let Jamie off the hook. That's the critical thing here, because it's partly about the long term. It's partly about you want the students listening to you. And if they think that they might get caught out and look a little bit silly in front of their peers, they're going to pay attention. So there you go.
So I had an interesting method of dealing with this for a number of years at my old school. I actually did insets on it, and I know we originally incorporated it into the very early days of our Craig and Dave resources. It was called solo taxonomy, and I won't go into it now, but essentially it took this whole question, this do you all understand, which of course is nonsense, and a very simple level. I had 4 posters around the room, A3 posters physically around the room in 4 corners, and the posters were effectively, I know nothing about this, I know something about it, I know a number of things, I'm confident to talk about this topic and link the concepts together. So it was 4 things, from I know nothing to I knew it. And what I would do, and this actually resulted in my best ever Ofsted lesson. I'd been doing solo for about a year, and it was a
solo taxonomy, just to be clear for everyone out there.
Solo taxonomy.
Solo taxonomy.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, solo taxonomy, if you want to look it up, it's excellent. And it was a lead HMI, and he watched my lesson and he went back. I'm going to boast now. He went to the deputy head after the lesson and said, that was the best lesson I've ever witnessed. And I was using solo taxonomy. At the start of the lesson, I had the question on the board. That was a school policy, not mine. This is what we're going to learn today. And I put the question up and I said, they're used to it. Again, consistency, the start of every lesson. Here's the question I'm going to be able to answer by the end of the lesson. Start by standing by one of those 4 posters. And they all knew what they meant. So I have no idea what that question's asking me. I think I do. I know. And then immediately the class is in 4 groups. They can't hide. And then you can challenge and target those groups. So I target a couple of students in the I don't know anything group. And what you'd find is, and I'd say, are you sure you know nothing about that? And of course I'd scaffold and help them. And they'd come up with an answer, go, well, you do then. You know something. So why have you put yourself down there? Move up to the next group. And they'd get used to it. They'd be like, if I stand in that bottom group, he's going to ask me every week. And they'd get better. That self-fulfilling prophecy of I know nothing, I can't do it. They'd be like, no, I do know something. At the same time, you could challenge the student that's gone right to the end there and go, you're not quite there yet, are you? You clearly know it, but you can't relate those concepts together. Just move down a bit. And then, of course, you teach your lesson. And at various points, and especially at the end of the lesson, you turn around and move them. And that was the bit the Ofsted inspector saw. It got to the end of the lesson, and I said, up you get. Everyone go and stand by the posters you first stood at the beginning of the lesson. Now, have a think again. I am going to question you. Do you know nothing, one thing, several things, or can you talk about today's topic confidently, linking everything together? Move. And you'd watch the whole class move. I mean, talk about this, can you show me progress within a lesson, which we debunked.
Sounds like you're playing to the gallery to me, Craig.
I know. But the point was they did it because it was consistent. This wasn't because Ofsted were in the room, and they moved. And then, of course, you question them. And it was, and that's great because this avoids the, do you all understand or are we all clear? And students know you're going to ask them to self-assess. And you're then going to sort of pick on people on each group. And again, the research shows overwhelmingly students are very good at self-assessing their own ability. The only issue comes in students who undervalue themselves, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe they've got a very complicated, opinion of themselves and they put themselves down. But this strategy tackles that because you talk and go, you did know something, move up a bit. And they become better at self-assessing. Yeah, and this was all about, as you say, targeted questioning. It's a clever form of targeted questioning, really. And you're right, we could do a whole series of videos on that. The number of insets I've sat through on high-performance questioning and targeted questioning and high-level questioning. But yes, try not to do those blanket phrases. Did you have anything more you wanted to say about that one, or should we move on to the third phrase?
You just reminded me we should probably do an episode on using mini whiteboards because that's another way of addressing exactly the same thing that you're talking about without necessarily moving them around the classroom. So good. No, let's move on.
That's it. Non-targeted questioning. That's what you should be avoiding. So very quick. And on the flip side, your back's turned. You hear someone do something or something gets thrown across the room. Don't turn around and say, who did that? It's non-targeted questioning. It doesn't work. What are you expecting? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I admit it was me. I threw it. Maybe once in a blue moon. Yeah. So non-targeted questioning in all its forms really is what this is about. Right. Phrase number 3 from Jamie that he must stop using. What's he put? Is everyone paying attention? Is everyone listening? Right. This is a bit of a variation of what I just said. This non-targeted question. Is everyone paying attention? What you would think? 7 people in and go, we weren't. Us seven weren't. What did Jamie have to say about this one then, Dave?
Yeah, of course, it's very similar to the previous answer, and we've explored lots of it. So there's not as much to say here that hasn't already been said. But Jamie says the fact that some students would be willfully not listening would quietly undermine me in every lesson. Yeah. Instead, I want to make more use of the masterful teacher pause. I will ask for attention at the front of the room, silently wait, scan the room, and then begin. The non-verbal elements of this are particularly important and can save a lot of energy, using the power of eye contact and posture to give the impression that what I have to say has importance. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, there's a lot we could say about this, but
yeah,
I'm quite guilty, to be honest, Craig, of just talking for the sake of it. I mean, you know that. I mean, everyone that watches this knows that. I can't help myself. And really, as a teacher, you should talk when there's a reason to talk, when there is something purposeful that you can add to the learning process. And if there isn't, then you should take a step back and not be involved. And, you know, it's one of those things that is quite tricky to train new teachers in, which is this art of stepping back. Just because you're not talking doesn't mean you're not doing something. And it's a skill to know when you just need to let the students get on with it. And if they've got a problem and if they're struggling with something, again, resist sometimes the temptation to immediately jump in and explore other ways. And again, we could do a whole episode on how you help students, but resisting that temptation and knowing when it's right for you to say something and when it's right for you to actually take a step back. And you should probably be taking more of a step back in your lesson than a step forward. And that's very, very hard to train new teachers to do. But yeah, is everyone paying attention? Is everyone listening? You know, these non-verbal cues, Craig, and this teacher pause, really important.
Yeah. I was going to say, sorry, this is why the flipped classroom process is so liberating. You're not at the front of the classroom at the start of every lesson having to didactically teach a new body of content for the first time. They've done it. But it does mean then that when you are speaking to students, each conversation should be purposeful and meaningful. And you're able to do that immediately. So, right, we're starting today's lesson. Who had some questions from the homework? Right, okay, you three come on here. We'll start. And you can have that conversation, and then you can circle that classroom, and you don't have to be talking, as you say, but you can engage with students. That looks really interesting. Tell me what you're doing there. Are you taking that in a new direction? Have you thought about X, Y, Z? That student, you're deepening their knowledge, you're stretching and challenging, and making sure that each of those conversations are targeted. I mean, an excellent technique I used to use, and it wasn't mine, I picked it up, I think, from an English teacher I watched, was where we typically had quite heavy coursework style subjects back in ICT. A lot of lessons where there's go on and get on with it. And I found myself getting to a stage where I was firefighting, and students were, you know, and it's like, actually start with, and it's simple now as an experienced teacher, I think, first of all, take a step back and ask yourself, how can I solve this? Then ask a peer. It was like a 3 or 4 step process. And then step 4, if you can't do it yourself and your peer can't solve it, come and write your name on this whiteboard. And the students would see, well, actually, there's 5 names on that whiteboard, and Sir's ticked off the first 3. He's not getting me till, you know, after Jamie and he's spoken to Anna. And it'd be like, right, okay, fine. Jamie, I'm coming over to you now to see how I can help you. It was those heavily coursework based lessons, and it suddenly felt like you weren't firefighting.
Didn't you have one of those, maybe it wasn't you, I can't remember, didn't you have, like, at one point counters in your room, and it was like a post office situation? Now serving number 2.
Oh,
number
I love
3,
that.
Please.
I love that idea, but that wasn't me.
No, but yeah, so it was somebody else, I can't remember who now then, but they had a pile of tokens, numbered tokens on the desk, and if a student needed help, they'd go and collect a token. And then the teacher would just go around them sort of one at a time and collect the token off them and put them back on the table, you know, when they'd help that student. And that was quite effective. But yeah, we could do a whole episode on helping students and firefighting and headless chicken and all the rest of it. So we'll leave that for another day. But yeah, is everyone paying attention? There's no point you asking that question. Is everybody listening? No point you asking that question, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you know already whether people are paying attention or not. You know, you don't need to ask that, you know.
Yeah.
And is everybody listening? No, they're not. Okay, so let me just tell you that as well. Even if they're looking at you, they're not listening. All right, some of them are not listening. So I can tell you that off the bat without even walking into your classroom. So it's about trying to maintain that attention. Don't talk for longer than is necessary. I can be a bit guilty of that, if I'm honest. And just pausing and using that teacher pause. Those moments of silence are really, really helpful. And maybe we can explore some of these in a bit more detail in future episodes. So there we are. So if you have got something that you'd like us to talk about, you know, what phrases do you hear teachers using if you're a student, or if you're a teacher, or if you've got a particular issue in your classroom? We would love to be able to hear it, and we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we've probably experienced things in our time that you experienced as well, and we can give our thoughts on it. So there we are, Craig.
Oh, that's marvelous. I tell you what, 45 minutes, but the time flies by when you talk about stuff like that. It's so much you can talk about and so many other videos. Well, thank you very much, everyone, again. And I'm going to leave you with one teacher phrase, which I always used to hear as a student, and I swore I would never deliver as a teacher. And 17 years in, and I have still never once said and never will. The bell's a signal for me, not for you. Goodbye, everyone.